Between 2014 and 2018, experienced men started vanishing into the shadows of the Knysna forest. There has always been a quiet weariness surrounding the high, old-growth compartments of this timber, a dread amplified by local tribal superstitions about things that detach from the high branches when the sea fog rolls in. For decades, as men of science and conservation, we wrote it off as native myth. But when our own personnel started disappearing in broad daylight without a sound, we were forced to act. We sent a good man deep into the restricted zones to mount a grid of Reconyx trail cameras. We were looking for poachers. We were hoping for a rational explanation. Much later, long after the official police search had been abandoned in those same woods, when the SD card from Camera 4 had finally been recovered, I locked myself in my office to review the data. What I found was a single relevant trigger event, a sequence spanning exactly 1.6 seconds. The first frame was logged just after 11:14 at night. A healthy 70-kilogram bushbuck stood dead center on the trail. His head was cranked at a severe vertical angle, staring straight up into the black canopy, his ears pinned flat against his skull. Frame 2 captured the impact, a massive, violent blur dropping directly out of the trees, hitting the buck with enough kinetic force to drive it completely to its knees. If the footage had ended there, it would have been a mystery, but it didn't end there. It was the third frame that ruined the forest for me. I've spent 31 years in the African bush, and I know what death looks like in the wild. It obeys the laws of physics. It obeys biology. But when I clicked to the third frame, and the motion blur cleared enough to show the anatomy of what had just landed on that trail, a cold, physical sickness settled deep into my chest. Because what I was looking at shouldn't exist, and the sudden, terrifying realization washed over me that the folklore was never just a story, and that we never were the apex predator in those woods. That was an excerpt from an email sent to me by a man who spent 31 years working for South African national parks, retiring at the rank of senior section ranger. He spent the last 2 decades of his career in the Knysna sector. He attached a digital copy of an independent biologist's report, a heavily redacted internal memo regarding trail closures, and a single low-resolution still frame from a Reconyx trail camera. Here is his full account. The forest at night does not photograph the way most people imagine. There is no clear darkness and no clear light. There is a layered grey, mottled by fern and wet timber, and the infrared throws a stark, flat grayscale across surfaces that the human eye would never read the same way. A trail camera triggered at midnight in the Knysna does not capture illusions. It produces a clinical, bureaucratic record, which is part of why what is on that hard drive has stayed with me. The Knysna forest is not the Africa most people picture. It is a temperate rainforest on the southern coast, choked with ironwood, stinkwood, and Outeniqua yellowwood trees, some 800 years old and over 100 feet high. Visibility on most trails is under 15 meters. The forest swallows light and it swallows sound, and the locals will tell you it swallows other things too. I know this forest, but the contracted forest workers, whose families have cut timber here for 140 years, know it differently. Woodcutters died here in the 1800s in patterns the colonial magistrates never quite explained. The inquests of 1886 and 1891 each reference woodcutters who simply did not return from the high compartments. There were no remains. The cases were written off as desertion. The men who cut alongside the missing did not return to those compartments for a generation. The pattern I'm about to describe is not new, it is only newly documented. Between September 2014 and August 2018, 4 people went missing from sections under forestry management. All within a 6-kilometer radius, all in compartments the older woodcutters had quietly avoided for decades. Case 1, September 2014. a senior ranger with 16 years experience, set out on a routine afternoon walk near the old Comsapad track. His vehicle was found at the trailhead. His radio had logged a normal contact at 1450. Clear voice, no distress. His rifle was still locked in its case. His lunch tin was on the passenger seat, half eaten. K9 units picked up his scent from the vehicle, followed it 300 meters up the trail, and then circled and refused to proceed. One handler, who I had worked with on 3 previous searches, told me privately he had only seen that behavior once before, near a leopard kill. He said this was different. The dogs were not afraid of something on the ground. They were looking up. Case 2, April 2016. 2 contracted workers were running an invasive species survey in the deep Val compartment, single file, 20 meters apart. The front man told investigators his colleague had been behind him on the path one moment and not there the next. No sound, no shout, no scuffle. We found the missing man's GPS smartwatch lying in the ferns. The internal accelerometer logs showed it moving at a normal walking pace, then recorded a violent, instantaneous upward acceleration spike, as if he had been snatched into the sky by a passing freight train. This was followed by a few seconds of random, chaotic thrashing before the biometric sensors went completely dead, and the strap must have violently snapped, dropping the lifeless screen back down into the ferns. The surviving worker resigned within a week. I spoke to him once, 6 months later. He told me he had stopped looking up at trees. He said it the way a man says he has stopped drinking, as a discipline. Case 3, November 2016. I lost a junior ranger named Sipum Longo. I trained him myself over 14 months. He was 26. Because of the previous disappearances, Sipu was tasked with setting up a grid of trail cameras in the Knysna compartment. We were officially looking for poachers. We found his vehicle at the trailhead. His official logbook was on the passenger seat. The final entry read, "Routine grid setup, canopy fog dropping to the ground." When Sipo failed to report in, the initial response was completely paralyzed by the weather. The sea fog was so dense that helicopter support was grounded and foot patrols were delayed for 3 critical days. When the police and K9 units finally pushed in, they found Sipu's personal notebook, half buried in the duff beside the trail. The last entry in his careful block handwriting was entirely normal. It read, "Camera 4 mounted at waypoint 7, visibility dropping fast, heading back to truck." Following the previous notes in the notebook, the police managed to recover 3 of the 4 cameras, which had been mounted on other trails. They were quickly found and reviewed without producing any hints. Camera 4 was supposed to be a bit further away. The police moved to waypoint 7 to retrieve it, hoping it had captured anything useful. But the camera was gone. At the base of the designated yellowwood tree, investigators found a snapped steel mounting cable lying in the ferns and deep gouges torn into the thick bark where the hardware had been fixed. The ground around the tree offered no help. It was covered in a thick, springy layer of forest duff that could not hold a clean print. The police drew the most logical conclusion: poachers. The official theory was that an armed poaching syndicate had ambushed Sipu, spotted the hidden trail camera, violently ripped it off the tree to destroy the evidence, and taken his body to hide the crime. It cemented the official narrative. The police spent a month combing the area for poacher encampments to no avail, and the search was eventually abandoned. Case 4, August 2018. A contracted worker missing for 9 days walked out of the forest near Buffelsneck at first light, severely dehydrated, uninjured. His clothing was stained with yellowwood resin and leaf mold. He could not account for the missing time, not repressed, absent. He could discuss the morning he entered and the morning he walked out in granular detail. The intervening 9 days were not there. The psychologist's final note said she had never encountered a presentation quite like it and did not feel competent to speculate further. 4 cases, 3 dead, 1 survivor, all isolated when targeted, no remains of the missing ever found. Months after Sipu disappeared, a routine forestry patrol marking diseased trees almost 4 kilometers away from where he vanished found camera 4. It was lying in the ferns, the heavy protective casing cracked wide open. The camera had remained attached to the tree for a few days, silently watching the trail while the fog kept the search parties away. Eventually, whatever took Sipu must have noticed the hardware on the trunk. It ripped the steel cable straight off the bark, carried the camera deep into the canopy, and simply dropped it kilometers away. Luckily, the SD card was intact. Because of the timestamps, I know exactly when the trigger event was recorded. On the second night of the fog, before it was torn down from waypoint 7. I will say this once and leave it. I have thought about him every day since. I have thought about his journal on the ground, and I wonder what he felt when he looked up. The camera itself had logged several triggers. Most were ferns moving in the wind, and one was the sequence I described at the beginning of this email. I watched it through twice on the laptop in my office, frame by frame. Then I went outside and stood in the car park for a long time. Then I went back in and watched it again. We contracted a wildlife forensics specialist, Dr. Visser. She has examined predator strike footage from across southern and eastern Africa. Her report concluded that based on the force required to drive a 70-kilogram buck to its knees in the short amount of time between frames, the striking animal had to weigh in excess of 120 kilograms. But it was the anatomy of the blur in frame 3 that caused her to refuse to put her conclusions on record. The shape of the limb hoisting the dead weight showed a clear, double-jointed shoulder structure and a gripping hand with an opposable thumb. The hand, by her measurement against the buck's known shoulder width, was approximately the size of a dinner plate. The thumb was set lower on the wrist than a human thumb. The musculature, even through motion blur, suggested an animal evolved for sustained vertical climbing under heavy load. Except for us, there are no apes native to southern Africa. There are no bears. We have baboons, but a large male weighs 30 kilograms. Baboons are noisy, they are diurnal, they leave a mess. To drop from a branch, strike an animal, and possess the explosive muscle fiber to scale a vertical yellowwood trunk with over 200 combined kilograms of dead weight in under 2 seconds requires a level of leverage and a type of strength that does not exist in any documented predator on this continent. Dr. Visser wrote that she did not believe the footage was fabricated, but she had no species attribution. She returned the drive to me by courier with a handwritten note that read, "I am sorry, I cannot help you with this." I have never spoken to her again. In late October of 2017, a man named Andris came to my office. Andris was in his late 70s, born in a deep forest camp just before his family was relocated to the Karatara settlement. His great-grandfather had been a woodcutter in the last decades of the 19th century, in the period the historians now call the Outeniqua's era. The younger forest workers deferred to him in a way that had nothing to do with employment structure. When Andris spoke, men who outranked him stopped talking. We watched the 1.6 seconds of footage 3 times. The third time, he asked me to pause on the first frame, the one where the buck is staring straight up. He looked at the screen for a long time. Then he asked me one question. "Was there heavy sea fog that week?" I looked at him for a moment. The second night of the fog was when camera 4 had recorded the footage. I told him there was. He nodded. "It uses the fog to hide its massive body in the high branches," he said. "The moisture deadens the sound of the wood cracking. It can hang right above you, hidden in the grey, while you stand visible in the clearer air below. My great-grandfather called it dwetang. He did not call it a ghost or a spirit. He described an animal, an apex predator that has lived in the upper canopy of the Knysna forest for centuries. The woodcutters of the 1880s had a working knowledge of it, the way a farmer has a working knowledge of jackals, not as a mystery, but as a known hazard. He said there had been 3 of them in his great-grandfather's working lifetime, and the woodcutters had referred to them by individual names, the way a man names a dangerous bull on a neighboring farm. It only hunts when the thick Indian Ocean fog rolls in over the mountains, because the dense moisture dampens the sound of its weight shifting through the branches. On clear nights you can hear them moving, the creak of the wood, the shift of a heavy mass compressing a yellowwood limb. On foggy nights, the forest deadens the sound, and they hunt. The canopy swallows the warning until the very last second, when a branch violently cracks right above you. The woodcutters had occasionally found, at the base of certain very old yellow woods, the bones of animals, bushbuck, bushpig, once a young eland, picked clean and dropped from a great height. The long bones cracked open at the joint by something with the leverage to do so. Never any soft tissue, only the bones. I asked him why no remains of the missing woodcutters were ever found. Andris looked at me grimly. "It drops the animals," he said, "but the men, it drags back deep into the hollows of the oldest trees." I asked him why nobody had ever shot one. Andris looked at me with a patience I will never forget. He said, "Because when men walk in the bush, they look for danger in the brush. They look for leopards, they look for snakes. They do not look 80 feet straight up, and the ones who do look up, they do not walk back out." He told me there was a rule his great-grandfather had taught him. I had heard fragments of it before. It went like this: if you are walking in the deep compartments and the cicadas suddenly stop, if the birds go quiet and the air suddenly smells sharp like wet copper, it means one of them has positioned itself on a branch directly above you. Keep your eyes on the dirt. Do not stop walking, and whatever you do, do not look up. If you look up, it knows you have seen it, and it will not let you leave. My grandfather said this, but his brother didn't listen, and they never found a single trace of him after 1889. Andris did not say anything else. He stood up, put his hat on, and walked out. I never saw him again. He died in early 2019, in his bed at the age of 80. The forest workers began to change their route preferences after that month. By early 2018, the men I knew best were detouring miles around the deep Valachauna service track, even when the detour added 40 minutes to their working day and reduced their piece rate earnings. When I asked one of them why, he just said in Afrikaans, "Ons loop dan nie meer nie." We do not walk there anymore. In the same period, the bushbuck population in those compartments began to decline in a way the official census could not explain. No increase in leopard activity, no documented poaching pressure. The animals had moved out. Animals do not abandon prime habitat without a reason. In April of 2019, the Commission ordered me to close the deep Valachauna track. The official reason given was yellowwood regeneration. No other yellowwood section in Knysna has ever been closed for that reason. The memo was signed 3 levels above my pay grade. I was not consulted. The day before the gates were padlocked, I broke the protocol I had spent my career enforcing. I drove out alone to the GPS coordinate where Sipo vanished. I don't know what I was looking for, a radio, a piece of fabric, a bone. I just needed to stand where my ranger had stood. I had told myself for 2.5 years that I would do it, and I had not. And the closure of the track was the last opportunity I would have. The early afternoon was clear, no fog in the canopy. The sun cutting clean shafts through the high branches. I parked at the same access track where Sipo's vehicle had been found. I chambered around in my rifle, which I had not done on a routine walk in years. I was 1.5 miles deep into the timber, and the forest sounded completely normal. The Knysna Otang, the olive woodpecker, the chorister robin. The canopy was alive with them. The wind was moving lightly through the ferns. I should not have been worried. Not according to Andris. He had said it came with the fog. I put the thought away. I had not come there to frighten myself with old stories. I had come for Sipo. So I kept walking. The GPS coordinate was a small clearing at the base of a yellowwood Andris would have called a groot boom. 1,200 years old if it was a day, the trunk wider than my truck. I stood at the base. I did not look up. I had decided in the car park that I would not look up no matter what happened. I stood at the base of the tree for perhaps 2 minutes. The leaf litter was undisturbed. There was nothing of Sipu there. At just past 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I checked my watch afterwards, 14:02. The forest went dead silent. It didn't fade. It cut out entirely. The wind stopped. The insects stopped. There is a particular quality to that silence, which I have only experienced once. It is not the silence of an empty room. It is the silence of a room in which something is holding its breath. Then I smelled it, heavy, metallic, copper and wet rot. Underneath it, something almost sweet, like fruit gone over. The smell did not arrive gradually. It arrived as if a door had been opened directly above me. Directly above my head, I heard the agonizing creak of a massive yellowwood branch bending under an immense, sudden weight. Bark rained down, hitting my head and my shoulders. Something heavy enough to bend a yellowwood limb that thick had just settled onto the wood directly over me, and it had done so without me hearing it arrive. It was not there. And then, it was there. Every instinct in my body, 31 years of tactical training, screamed at me to raise my rifle. The Barno .375 was capable of stopping a buffalo at close range. I was certain in that moment it would not be enough, but I remembered frame 1. The buck looking up, ears pinned, the last thing it ever did, and I remembered the old man's rule. I locked my eyes on the mud between my boots. My heart was hammering so hard it blurred my vision. My hands were shaking on the rifle strap in a way they had not shaken in 3 decades of field work. I gripped the strap, put one foot in front of the other, and turned to walk. I did not run, I walked, staring at the dirt. Just at the edge of the clearing, where my inbound trail crossed a patch of soft loam, I saw it. Stepping directly on top of the heel of my own boot track, overlapping it entirely, was an impression I will not describe in detail. I will say it was elongated and that it had toes. An animal with a hand the size of a dinner plate should displace its weight, leaving a relatively shallow print, but this track was driven incredibly deep into the dense clay beneath. Because it was stamped directly over my inbound track, I knew exactly what it meant. The horrible realization hit me. It hadn't just arrived above me, it had followed me into the clearing on the ground, stepped on my inbound track, and then climbed the massive yellowwood to wait for me to stop. When I refused to look up or break my stride, it had simply gripped the bark and silently ascended back into the canopy to get ahead of me. I did not stop. I did not photograph it. I walked past it, and I kept walking. For 1.5 miles, I heard it tracking me. The shifting of weight from one massive branch to the next, the creak of yellowwood limbs accepting and releasing a load. Always above me, always slightly ahead the way a leopard stalks, controlling the line of escape. When I slowed, the creaking slowed. When I sped up, and I tried twice before I forced myself back to a walk, the shifting above me sped up to match. It was waiting for me to look up. The whole hunt, I understood later, was structured around that single offered choice. The buck had taken the offer. Sipu, I have to assume, had taken the offer. I did not. I did not look up until my hand touched the metal door of my truck. When I did finally lift my eyes, only level, not up, level. The canopy above the access track was perfectly still. The birds had started again, somewhere in the middle distance, the way birds start again after a leopard has moved through. The forest had decided I was no longer relevant. I drove away at once, my hands locked around the wheel, slick with sweat. I retired that same year. I was 61. I had planned to work until 65, but I did not have 4 more years in me. I cited a back injury, took my pension, and went home. Against data policy, I took a copy of the footage. I keep the hard drive in a fireproof safe in my study, behind a folder of tax records nobody would ever bother to open. I have been asked for it by journalists and documentary producers. I refuse them all. A public that knows less than I do will not arrive at a better understanding by watching a 2-second video on the internet. They will arrive at a worse one. They will go into the forest looking for it. I live on the coast now, 2 hours from the forest. I do not go inland. My wife knows part of the story, not all of it. She knows enough not to ask me to walk in the timber plantations above town, even though they are pine, even though they are not the same forest at all. I think about Sipo every single day. I think about a 26-year-old kid out there alone in November 2016, stranded in the suffocating daytime gloom beneath the canopy fog. I think about him suddenly smelling that sharp, metallic reek of wet copper, feeling the crushing shift in air pressure just a split second before it hit him. I think about him doing what any trained ranger would naturally do. I think about him doing what I was a half second from doing that afternoon. I think about him looking up. That was the ranger's account. Before he ended his email, he left me with one final thought. A theory aimed specifically at those living overseas. He wrote, "I have not spent my retirement trying to forget what is in those woods. I have spent it trying to understand. Over the last 5 years, I have extensively studied forestry records and missing persons cases from around the world. And I have paid very close attention to the North American forests, the Pacific Northwest, the Appalachians, the deep timber of Canada. You have your own stories over there. You have your Sasquatch, your wild men, your mountain spirits. But look closely at the sheer volume of unexplained disappearances in your national parks. A hiker steps behind a tree and is gone before their friend can turn around. A hunter vanishes and the K9 units hit a wall of scent and completely refuse to track. Your search and rescue coordinators always give the exact same baffled statement. It is as if they simply vanished into thin air. But I always find myself wondering about the soil in those exact spots. What does the ground actually look like right where the person vanishes? In the Knysna, our forest floor is mostly duff, a thick, spongy layer of decaying leaves, wet bark, and root matter. It acts like a mattress. It does not hold footprints. It swallows evidence. I think about the anatomy of the animal in our footage. If a creature with that kind of explosive muscle fiber drops out of the canopy, snatches someone, and uses the ground to instantly launch itself back up into the branches, it wouldn't leave a neat trail of footprints walking away. On a bed of forest duff, or even hard-packed snow, the only sign left behind would be a single, chaotic depression in the dirt. Something investigators would easily write off as a weather disturbance or natural forest damage. I am writing this to tell you that your missing people are not falling into alternate dimensions. They are being hunted by an apex predator that has evolved to hunt from above. A creature massive enough to kill a man instantly, but agile enough to traverse the high canopy without a sound. For a long time, I treated Andris's rule, do not look up, like a supernatural curse, a piece of dark folklore from the 1800s. But I have spent my entire life observing wildlife, and recently, the terrifying biological reality of that rule finally clicked into place. When an animal is suddenly startled, it does not immediately run. It does exactly what that bushbuck did in the first frame of our footage. It stops dead, pins its ears back, and looks toward the source of the sound to assess the threat. It freezes, even if it is only for a fraction of a second. The dwetang drops from a significant height through dense canopy, which means a moving target is a highly unpredictable variable. If it drops while a deer or a man is still walking, it risks missing the trajectory entirely. It needs that split-second freeze to ensure absolute, pinpoint accuracy, guaranteeing it lands dead center on its target. That is why it stalks you. I don't believe that it's a spirit playing a supernatural game. It is a biological ambush predator perfectly adapted to manipulate the mammalian startle reflex. It cannot risk the drop without being absolutely sure its target is perfectly still. It is waiting for you to stop, lock your feet into the earth and look up. That split-second freeze is its only window of opportunity. It is a brutally quick and efficient process. It draws no attention, conserves vital energy, and ultimately explains the sheer lack of sightings and the incredible elusiveness of the creature. People look for footprints in the mud. They look for danger in the brush. They are looking in the wrong place. Our camera in the Knysna and the tragic death of my ranger may be the closest thing to evidence we have. If you are walking in the old-growth timber and the forest suddenly goes dead silent, if the wind dies and the air smells like wet copper and ozone, do not run. Look at the ground, keep walking, and pray it decides you aren't worth the effort. But whatever you do, do not stop and do not look up.